A whole lot can change in a series over time, and the metagame can shift with browsers too. Case in point, this video's sponsor, Opera GX. Opera GX is a browser with a loadout of features designed with gamers in mind. Want to keep your PC running smoothly? GX Control gives you precise control over how much RAM and CPU can be used at a time. Just pull up the menu and adjust to your liking. When certain other browsers are still resource hogs, this is a huge quality of life improvement. And if you want customization, the built-in GX store has an extensive list of free GX mods for changing your browser design. Just find one you like, install it, and there you go. You can further customize each mod's color palette, extra sound effects, and even background music. Allowing user expressiveness is always good design. And GX Corner is a one-stop spot for gaming news. I remember reading Nintendo Power back in early 2002 and learning about the new Smash game and all the new characters in it, and this is built as a successor to the gaming magazines of your childhood. And if you're curious, Opera GX's quick import tool lets you bring in your history, bookmarks, and all of that data directly from your previous browser faster than you can say Waveshine. All of these features and more can be yours by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment and downloading Opera GX for free today. Might just become your new main. Thanks to Opera GX for the sponsorship, and now for our main topic. Smash Brothers and tier lists. They go together like Sheik mains and intricate combos, or Roy mains and pressing the A button. Even compared to other fighting games, recent ones included, Smash fans love finding stuff to rank the roster over. But I want to create a tier list on a surprisingly rare topic. There's hardly been any discussion of how well designed Smash's characters are, and I want to try my proverbial hand at it. Last episode in this series, we covered the original 12 from Smash 64, and this time we're covering everyone who made their debut in Melee. This list will have a 7-tier format from top tier to bottom, letting us get into minute detail on how each fighter compares to the others. We'll be judging them based on the premise of their design, how well that premise works in practice, how well they've aged over time, including moveset updates as of Ultimate, and how effectively they carry the spirit of that character into Smash. And as always, this is mostly an opinion piece, so don't be disheartened or frustrated if my thoughts end up wildly different from your own. So, let's get started. Ready? After Smash 64's surprise success, Princess Peach was one of the most popular requests for the sequel, and so she made her debut in Melee, and with a pretty comprehensive moveset. While she's famous for getting kidnapped all the time, Peach has always had moments where she fights back. Isn't that right, RPG spin-offs? Updates to her moveset over time have refined the peachiness further, replacing weirdly animated physical strikes with fancy-looking magic. And Ultimate finally made Toad act like an actual bodyguard instead of a living shield. This combination of high-class vibes and surprisingly brutal blows vibes really well with the direct pulls from Super Mario Bros. 2, her first playable role, and a couple sneaky nods to Super Mario RPG. But Peach does have a few debatable blemishes. Maybe her neutral special could be something else, freeing up Toad to be playable, and maybe the very high execution barrier brought on by all of her float cancel combos clashes with her a bit. But that doesn't detract from a high-tier design that starts Melee off strong. But if Peach is here, then so must be... Come on, man, she's just not into you. Bowser in Smash took some time to get right. In Melee, he was this big, hulking monstrosity who walked like a kaiju, clawed and bit at opponents, and slid across the ground on his nails. Fearsome to look at, but it wasn't in character, not even in the early 2000s. And with nothing going for him besides some strong attacks, Bowser was famously awful in Melee and still pretty bad in Brawl. Then Smash 4 brought a much appreciated glow-up. Bowser gained an upright stance, more punches and body blows like how he canonically fights, and overall feels so much more like himself. And pointed changes to the stats and details of certain moves have made him the example of a platform fighter grappler. He threatens people with a great set of standard throws and a big scary command grab. He has a single button damage racker with his flame breath, and he even has a lariat-like move in Whirling Fortress with an animation tailored to his specific abilities. There's just one thing dragging Bowser's design down from the top. While his appearance and animations have come a long way from Melee, his voice hasn't. Still stuck with weird animal noises, it's a far cry from the iconic voice work he's had since Super Mario Galaxy. Bring that in, change his side taunt to the boisterous laugh he does all the time, and he'd be perfect. But right now... he'll have to settle for high tier. It's funny, the Ice Climbers are so well known now that it's easy to forget how they started. Brought in from an obscure NES title because the game's co-op play was an interesting angle to build a moveset around, enough folks got attached to them that there was an uproar when they sat out in Smash 4. This series can turn no-names into icons overnight. Sakurai and the Melee devs actually got a lot of mileage out of very little source material. Popo and Nana fighting in tandem, sending pieces of ice sliding like enemies can in the game, using an elastic rope to slingshot each other to safety. Though the team did take creative liberties, the pair couldn't create ice on command originally, but it's done smoothly enough that players don't notice. But despite the creativity on display, the Ice Climbers have never worked as intended in any game they've been in. Their base abilities are always underwhelming, not helped by Nana's perpetually not bright AI, which is why their players always gravitate toward the very powerful cheese tactics they always seem to end up with. Infinite wobbling in Melee, infinite chain grabs in Brawl, and difficult but still dubious touch of death kill setups in Ultimate. Plagued by degenerate stuff propping up a kit that has never worked as intended, it feels like the summit of this duo's design potential has never been reached. Though you can help this channel reach its potential by subscribing. Seriously, a lot of people forget to, and this way you'll stay up to date on when more videos are ready or almost ready. Next, we have a shining example of right place, right time. Since Ocarina of Time was still relevant enough during Melee's development, it opened the door for Zelda and her stealthy alter ego to join as a 2-for-1 deal. We haven't seen the Sheik persona show up again aside from one spin-off, yet the character is stuck around in Smash nonetheless. Is that still a Zelda in the suit at this point, or someone else? Despite the lack of mainline action, Sheik has done a solid job keeping up between games. Her Brawl/Smash 4 design pulled from Twilight Princess concept art that went unused, and Ultimate has her don the Sheikah stealth armor from Breath of the Wild and its sequel. Even picked up a couple new specials in Smash 4 that feel ninja adjacent enough. One to replace the transformation when she and Zelda were separated, and one as a better extension of an old move that was almost never worth using. And Sheik has also managed to hang on to a specific niche within the roster. The light, fast rushdown fighter with a ton of combos but low damage per hit is a recurring thing in fighting games, and Smash has had someone fill that niche ever since Melee. Well, not very well in Brawl, but every other entry. Which is how this character, who hasn't had a major role since 1998, has managed to stave off her datedness decently well. As for the princess herself, just like Sheik, Zelda's appearance has changed twice. Started with Ocarina of Time, then swapped to Twilight Princess in Brawl, and now she's a mix of A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. Also like Sheik, Zelda's actual moveset hasn't changed much, picking up a new down special in Smash 4, a new jab in Final Smash in Ultimate, and that's it. But unlike Sheik, there's been more of a divide between these two sides. Since each Zelda is a specific character with specific abilities, keeping the same goddess spells from Ocarina of Time has been a trickier sell. Also hasn't helped that her kits struggled to be very effective. While a defensive playstyle based around stage control does fit, stuff not working as well as it could has placed Zelda near the bottom of competitive tier lists in every game so far. This character's in a weird spot. Her design right now works decently on paper, but has come up short in practice outside of casual play. It's not unsalvageable, but depending on which Zelda takes the role next Smash game and how distinct she is from the others, a full overhaul might be the wiser decision. We'll have to see. Alright, time to start talking about the clones. With too little time to make another full-fledged newcomer, but still wanting to cram more characters into the roster, Melee famously added a bunch of moveset clones. We'll be talking about how well each of these have branched out from their source characters over time, and how successfully they formed their own identities. As the first of them in line, Dr. Mario fit the bill. As someone who could branch off the model and moveset of Mr. Nintendo himself. His base stats play off the stronger but slower cliché, with much worse mobility than his plumber counterpart. One of his Melee trophies says it's because he's not as in shape, but better damage per hit without worse frame data, and new properties on some attacks. Mega Vitamins are bouncier than fireballs, his side special's hitbox is different, his up special is a single hit with much more power but less distance, and his down special is Mario's old one one from before Brawl. Fine enough in theory, but being very slow with short range and poor recovery has proved to be a crippling set of weak points. They weren't as noticeable in Melee because he lucked out with a long wave dash, and most characters in that game were easy to edgeguard, but ever since, this clone turned semi-clone's design has been too inherently flawed to truly do its intended job. Meanwhile, in Johto, so this is an odd one. Originally designed as a joke character, intentionally worse than Pikachu in every way, and some unintentional ways like a tech roll that went nowhere, Pichu was thrown in as something for good players to handicap themselves with for fun. Your mileage may vary on the quality of that idea, but a grand return in Ultimate brought a bevy of upgrades that turned this Dan into more of an Akuma. Now an all-or-nothing glass cannon, Pichu's damage output is on par with Pikachu's, with attacks that are often faster, racking up damage with explosive combos and finishers. Weakening the recoil mechanic's damage took what was a huge drawback of using anything electrical and made it a minor risk. And a much smaller hurt box, a little too small sometimes before a patch adjusted it, made for a tiny, slippery target who can sneak through opponents' defenses and overwhelm them with constant attacks. But there are still serious drawbacks in the form of short range and by far the lowest weight in the game. Overall, like Pichu's half-evolved counterpart, I got mixed feelings on this one. The concept's an actual character now and not a punchline, but the moveset still has Pikachu's problem of feeling kinda dated, with nothing beyond Gen 2 aside from the final smash. Makes the overall design feel pretty mid. Now this Melee clone didn't wait long to branch out more. Brawl made a habit of diverging clone movesets from their source characters, and Falco took that and ran with it, jumped with it. He gained several new moves, split his stats off even further from Fox, and his specials picked up more unique properties, and in one case showed off his personality better. This has led to Falco settling on a very different fighting style from his counterpart. Where Fox covers horizontal distance fast and overwhelms opponents with his speed and fancy footwork, Falco is all about vertical combat and harassing opponents until he can force them into that. Mediocre lateral movement, but very high and fast jumps let him combo and juggle folks with ease. He prefers the air for good reason, though it took some time to work as intended. In Brawl, he got more mileage from laser camping and chain grabs, and in Smash 4 he was pretty subpar. Ultimate's been where Falco's design has finally clicked, and while it's not a perfect one and its semi-cloneness is still apparent, it's solidly above average, cheesy voice acting aside. Funny how a moveset mostly invented for Smash has a variant now that itself became half its own thing. How far Fire Emblem has come. Marth was originally planned to be in Smash 64, but instead it was Melee that introduced him and his series to Western audiences, and the rest is history. Helped that Marth was particularly powerful in Melee, so players who were intrigued by the weird anime-looking guy were greatly rewarded. As the archetypical Sword Lord, Marth's become a roster anchor of sorts. His speed and finesse were originally meant as a contrast to Link, but now he's compared more to the clones and semi-clones who've spun off his moveset. It's made the Smash devs seek out ways to ensure Marth stands out from the other speedy sword fighters, even those who haven't spun off from him. And in his most recent rendition, that's caused issues. Ultimate does this thing where it tries to make older characters stand out by exaggerating their gimmicks. Marth's tipper effects are so iconic that there's an entire platform fighter archetype built off it, but he leans so hard on them in Ultimate that it's made him less satisfying to play as. Even with the tip of his sword being stronger than ever, universal buffs to everyone's burst movement, and the loss of some confirms, have given him a harder time landing them and netting knockouts than ever. He was always prone to opponents living to high percents sometimes, but now Marthritis has become a serious weakness. He still has a good design, but hopefully next game tones down the extremes and gives the Hero King a more stable foundation. Back to Hyrule, where an old clone who was succeeded in Brawl by someone else came back fresh in Ultimate. And now we have 3 versions of Link running around. Awkward. Toon Link carried the torch of variant with better mobility but worse range and power, so the Ultimate devs had to find a way to make young Link still stand out. Their solution? Lean in on frame data. With the fastest attacks and best combo prowess of the trio, young Link is a bullet hell zoner with few gaps in his wall and freakishly good damage racking to the point where I'm not sure the devs thought this fully through. His rapid fire attacks are so much that people think he moves faster than he does, actually has below average mobility, and combined with the shortest sword of the trio, it does ensure the faster and decent ranged Toon Link still has a niche. Still, it doesn't stop the young hero of time from feeling kind of redundant. Toon Link took the ideas he introduced in Melee and went even further with them, and now young Link is left scrambling to justify his existence. And it's not even the devs' fault. Bringing back everyone in Smash history and finding room for newcomers didn't afford much time to experiment. It just leaves me wondering what more could be done for the kid, if he even comes back again at all. Speaking of untapped potential, yes, the mighty Demon King, one of the most powerful warriors and sorcerers in Nintendo's entire repertoire, with a moveset derived from Captain Falcon's. Despite it being the only reason he was able to get into Melee, saying Ganondorf's current kit is a sore spot in the community is an understatement, even if he's picked up some original moves over time. This might be a hot take, but I don't think his current design is irredeemable. It actually does have some things that feel in character. The sheer power on display befits he who wields the Triforce of Power. The new/altered moves he's gained have been pretty solid, from Flame Choke to his overhead forward air to the and there are even a couple direct nods to stuff Ganondorf has done in his boss fights. His forward tilt's an exact recreation of a move he uses in Twilight Princess. So while yes, Ganondorf could definitely use a remake, and I actually tried my hand at one a year ago, I don't think his current moveset needs to go completely. We can keep some of the best parts, overhaul the rest based on his almost too popular design from Tears of the Kingdom, and create something that embodies his dominating power and demonic ambitions better than ever before. But his current version? Just low tier, not bottom. I'd make a segue here about villains, but Mewtwo kind of isn't one in the actual Pokemon games. The prodigal mon with a complicated history in Smash, he got his big break in Melee, sat out for Brawl, was Smash 4's first DLC character, and returned in Ultimate because everyone did. Brawl players thought he was replaced by Lucario because their neutral specials are similar, but now we know Mewtwo was planned to be there too, the proverbial first one out due to time constraints. His Melee design took some creative liberties that future appearances stuck with, for better or worse. A glass cannon with unexpectedly very low weight, hand waved by saying it's caused by his constantly active levitation, Mewtwo is based around creating pressure, but his frailness, and a constant hurtbox on most of his tail, make for a much warier playstyle than one would expect from a genetically engineered godlike being. The moves themselves are a decent mix that incorporate a lot of character-specific traits and a few psychic and ghost-type attacks, and run into the same hang-up of never tapping into Pokemon's much bigger modern move pool aside from the final Smash. While not bad, this one still feels off in a few different ways. If Mewtwo makes it back next game, a remake might not be out of the question. Something that plays more like one would expect Mewtwo to play, works in more psychic moves from Gen 3 onward, and lets his personality truly shine. Speaking of personality, the last of the Melee clones, and boy does this one have a story behind him. Meant as a late ad cameo from a game set to launch a couple months beforehand, things got complicated when said game got delayed late in development to come out after Melee. Yet Roy still proved popular enough that when he missed Brawl, being cut for time just like Mewtwo, fan outcry led to him coming back in Smash 4's DLC, and then again in Ultimate alongside everyone. And it took until Ultimate for Roy's moveset to truly click. While he was always meant as a more aggressive take on the Sword Lord moveset, a lot of his kit in Melee just didn't function, forcing him into that game's populous bottom tiers. Smash 4 gave him a semi-clone moveset with more unique animations, that I bet was designed for Brawl since it decloned other characters too, but that game's mechanics worked against him enough that it left him pretty mediocre. But Ultimate's environment works with him, his attacks are safer and combo properly now, and he's become powerful and very commonly played. It's a shame that it doesn't really fit his personality. Roy's actually not this hardcore aggressive guy in Fire Emblem proper. He's more scholarly and introspective, lacking in hands-on experience and thrust into a leadership role he isn't ready for. While depictions since Melee have helped bridge that gap somewhat, there's still work to be done if he comes back next time to reconcile his canon self with the dragon-like ferocity of his moveset. And last but not least, believe it or not, I actually knew who this guy was when I heard he got into Melee. I had a couple Game & Watch Gallery games as a kid, so I knew about Nintendo's old LCD stuff, and I thought a character based around them was a cool idea. A surprise second retro newcomer, Mr. Game & Watch's unusual animations stand out even now. Had some interesting lore in Subspace Emissary too. And his moveset goes all out. Loaded with references to different Game & Watch games, it runs the gamut from well-known ones like Fire and Chef to some deeper cuts, especially the stuff he got in games after Melee. Tropical Fish Neutral Air, anyone? Not every fighter needs to pull out references to their games for every move. I've noticed it's a common pitfall among fan movesets and a couple non-Smash platform fighters, but with some characters it fits perfectly, and this is such an inherently oddball concept that it definitely works here. Honestly, I don't have any major complaints with this one. It does a great job embodying the spirit of the Game & Watch series, has that old school charm, and just a bit of extra jank that fits the character. We got ourselves a winner here. Even if taking a trampoline to the face anytime you touch his shield and ultimate is a bit much. And that's where we stand so far. The cast of Melee, and Smash 64 last time, ranked based on how well I think their designs hold up. Melee brought in a lot of iconic characters that have aged in wildly different ways. Interesting comparing and contrasting them all like this. But where would you put them? I'm curious to hear how you'd rank the Melee characters' designs, so if you got some thoughts to share, drop down to the comments like Marth going for an Edgeguard. And if I've entertained or inspired you, check out my other content. I do a lot of Smash-themed videos, like designing movesets for characters who haven't made it in yet, or remaking some current movesets that haven't held up well. Special thanks to these people for helping make this video happen, especially the ever-growing number of patrons for pitching in and supporting me. Means a lot, guys. And thanks again to Opera GX for the sponsorship. So, until next time, I actually have one of those remakes in the works now. Time to give Luigi a design that isn't so egregiously cheesy.